So we're rushing a little bit to catch up on time, my apologies. But the next panel is, we have two excellent speakers for high concentration in democracy, what is the interaction? I think this is going to be a very interesting discussion, and I hope we can get some really good audience participation on this as well. I'm going to invite first to speak Yo Grobel. Yo? You don't have any slides, do you? No, I'll leave.
The advantage of having no slides is that no one can take my words afterwards, proof that I have said bad things. Actually, I think...
I would remind you.
Oh, sorry. Okay, perfect. Okay, no, but never mind. The Germans are bad, but not that bad. So it's and particularly no bad words. Point is that until now, I think we have very strongly focused on data, and of course, I think that's the real big advantage of the project. However, I already mentioned this this morning, and I would repeat that. Why do we address concentration at all? I mean, it's nice to have a descriptive study. However, there must be some kind of a context, some kind of I wouldn't call it a normative a reference point, and that's exactly what we're probably addressing in this session. And I would go beyond the data and also challenge that the data as a whole give a simple answer to the session, because the first thing we probably would have to do is to define what is democracy, and I'd rather not enter this discussion, and what is the relationship, we heard in the case of China, what is the relationship between democracy on the one hand and economic growth and economic well-being on the other. And I've just warned, taken the example of Russia, I said that also before in the discussion, I warned that let's first be all economically well off, and then automatically you will have more democracy. There are many examples that's not necessarily the case. If I'm in power, I'd say, well, great, everyone should have a good life, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I would at one stage be willing to leave the power behind and say, no, I leave and you are more democratic. So that's one issue. The second, and also briefly going beyond the data, is the basic question, also challenging another aspect, and it was mentioned by, sorry, over there, that, okay, no, but then we will have social media and then it will be automatically democratic. Sounds at first sight charming and true, but, you know, traditional media and organized media, they probably have one advantage, at least in the democratic society, and the advantage being that there are quality criteria defined, and there's an accountability. And as much I myself use social media, I'm not so sure about the institutionalized accountability when it comes to information depth, spectrum, quality, and the same is true for opinion. So what I'm challenging is it's more or less automatically being taken care of, but it's a question of choices. So how do we define democracy at all? What is the relationship between democracy and economic well-being in terms of the more powerful the media, the better? And of course also what are the future balances when it comes to to social media? Let me very briefly, I could have put this into a graphic, but say what you could in a very simplified way define as functions of particularly news journalism, but probably also the media as a whole. Of course, the democratic Western model of democratic media means that we have a spectrum where we would expect to be as close to the, if at all, identifiable facts as possible informed. So one is what I would call the Anglo-Saxon, primate or a priority criterion for good journalism and probably good media is just stick to the facts. The same holds for science. So in this respect, I think let's say when we use data, we try to be as close to truth. It's not possible, of course, but as possible. And the same holds for the journalism I would regard as the fundament of a working democratic or democracy-serving journalism. So what we then have, and we need to distinguish. We have opinion media, and I would personally file a lot of what is happening on social media more in the area of opinions, rather than sound, resource-eating, resource-demanding research, which goes into depth, which goes into the broader? Do we do it by adding up all the voices we get via social media? I challenge that notion. So, opinions need to be represented also in a pluralistic way, as it is true for the question, how is information be defined? And again, that makes it so difficult to draw conclusions from the overall data, because looking closer at all the different individual national data, we have sometimes hardly to be compared media structures, political structures, and therefore to make a conclusion and saying now the data support more this or that model, I think it's difficult. I'd rather say let's use.
Let me jump in real quick.
Okay.
I've got a question for you.
Okay, perfect.
You're focusing on the idea of social media and social voices and this idea that what should be counted. And what I'm curious about is, are we then talking about a devaluing of certain voices? Are you saying that the man or woman on the street, with a very strong Twitter following, a very outspoken anti-establishment voice, shouldn't count as much as the editorial written in the Wall Street Journal?
Not at all. Not at all. I'm just saying that their opinions are exactly as valuable as any other. So that's what I say. That's particularly a more democratic development. So on that front, I would not challenge it. What I'm challenging is that you add up opinions and come up in the end with the result. This is a perfect description of reality. That's the difference. So opinion-wise, absolutely 100%, but I challenge the idea of that social media can be accounted for presenting as a scientist, being as close to the reality description as possible.
Equality of the value of opinions, that's what you say.
Exactly, yes. And one thing is also true for, let's say, traditional journalism. At best, I'm always describing the idea, you have identifiable instances, persons, companies, whatsoever, and they are accountable afterwards. And that's probably not true for social media. So for me, it's a very, very important thing, why I'm not saying, well, concentration, traditional media, it's not in the end a real issue for democracy because we have social media anyway. There are different approaches to that, and how good or not so good develop. Final thing, very, very briefly, is that of course you also have, and that's also partly coming across here, journalism, mostly it's a mixture, of course, that is more driven by markets. Now, if I look, I said this morning too, at many media, including Germany or United States, I see that it's the primary question, maybe it's democratic, is does it sell or doesn't it sell? So the in-depth journalism is probably less market fit than, let's say, the headlines and the hype of the day, which, quite honestly, a little critically, I've followed over the last couple of days here in the United States. I finish because I want to make you happy.
That's fine. Thank you. I'll just have your phone and ring it. It's
Great.
fine.
I think two challenges ahead. Number one, we could address this in the data, but the mobile sector, which was several times mentioned before, is now so fast, is developing so fast, and it's more than just another platform. I think that the way of journalism, the way of concentration, the way people cope with information is changing if we go to smartphones, tablets, etc., and they become a increasingly primary source for everything. Last year, Ellie knows it, we presented it partly together. I published a book in Germany on a typology of particularly television users. And we see the younger generation, traditional TV is off, many other things are off, so there's a new but mobile platform-based approach to journalism and media as a whole. And I think that needs to be considered. And the very, very final one, some hope. We talked in terms of concentration about pluralism as a whole. Interesting models within companies go for, also in Germany, for example, go for what they call internal pluralism. So you have a media concentration on the one hand. At the same time, there are some codices to guarantee an internal pluralism. So one publishing house at the same time takes care of saying it's financially necessary, we need to concentrate, at the same time we take care and can be controlled out from outside world, we take care of an internal pluralism. So you would, in classical terms, traditional terms, left-wing and right-wing newspapers under the same roof. Whether it works remains to be seen. Thanks a lot.
Just before you go, before we bring up Juan, I do have one more question for you real quick. You were starting to talk about the idea that the mobile devices are such a integral part in the changing of journalism, especially younger individuals. One of the things that we see in this report is that across the world, high concentration in the mobile sphere.
Right.
Is there a worry that as this device, the mobile networks, become more and more integral, and the fact that it's such a highly concentrated field, that is a field that really needs some kind of
the logic, and I think you to a certain extent addressed this yesterday already, is really new forms of storytelling. So a mobile device means at the same time, if I go all the way and it's there already, that via the device I can be located and I can exactly be identified what kind of interests or what kind of motives I would, or even moods I would have in a certain situation. And journalism or media as a whole, media content would react to that. So it's very crucial that a mobile platform at the same time also uses some content. And that's where we have the transfer of the two sectors.
Thank you, Yo. And our second speaker for the panel is Juan Enrique Huerta from Mexico. Yep. Juan, your slides are up already.
Well, thank you for the invitation. I'm really glad to be here. So I have just, as Joe said, that the relation between democracy and media concentration is really huge topic. So I will just address three really tiny comments about what this project is emerging from. So the first conclusions of Eli is about all this data. Eli and his team is quality of regulation showed no statistically significant correlation for concentration in any of the industries, right? So, and this relationship is important because one of the first things that are interest for analysis is higher pluralism across any industry relates to diversity of factors and perspective, which is good for democracy in itself. So, right. So a first basis for analysis is that we need more voices, and this plurality at the beginning will be good for democracy. That's essentially the concept of democracy. So this is this overall concentration and some indicators for good government, right? But perhaps not any concentration matters for democracy. So perhaps it's not the same that we have concentration in movie theaters or news, right? So maybe it's not the same, entertainment or political opinions. For democracy, it's perhaps not the same if concentration is entertainment or news. And what this particular project concludes is that high shares exist where government-controlled media operations like China, Egypt, Russia, and all institutions are weak. It's the case of Brazil, Mexico, India, or Italy. So maybe concentration in some aspects of the industry matters for democracy quality, right? There are other institutional arrangements related to democracy. Democracy at the beginning is the right to vote and be voted. But maybe there is just other aspects, like, for example, other aspects of the rule of law. And we have this is a really cross-national study coming from data from 58 countries related to the issue of bank corruption. So this is entrepreneurs in 58 countries around the world being asked for a question: do you think that bank corruption is an issue in this particular country for business operations? And what we can see in these particular regression models is that larger the concentration of press or TV companies, larger the corruption that people perceive in bank systems, right? That is another ways to relate to democracy indicators. So how does it work? I'm sorry, I will talk about a little bit about Mexico because, well, that's indeed the only case that deeply know. And so how does it work, the relationship between concentration and democracy equality? Mexico is highly concentrated. The number of industries it is really difficult to see in several industries a large concentration indicators in the media system. This is particularly true for television news. So Televisa is the largest industry in television across Hispanic countries. So what to do to control? Well, what our current president did for control news is get the bride, right? So this is our first lady in Mexico. It used to be a main actress from Mexican soap operas, telenovelas. So as a result, what some people suspect, really mean people suspect, is that what the president people did was a relationship with Televisa through a marriage, right? Mm. So that's the Guardian. That's what the Guardian suggests. By having this relationship, Televisa acquired a millionaire contract to encourage the campaign, the federal campaign, to the Mexican elections, presidential elections. So first get the bride to shut out other voices. See if there are other voices additional to Televisa, you can shut out, right? So this is again what the Guardian says about. Well, this is our the mention of the president. It costs about $7 million, which in pesos is a lot of money. So once the news appeared, so you can just cancel the opportunity to other voices to appear in the public media, right? As a result of that, you can gain the race, right? You can gain again the political race. So I mean that's just a few words about really the comments about what about the interaction between democracy and concentration in media. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yo, if you want to bring the mic over, and
Okay.
do we have any questions from the audience?
Jason,
Yes, Alfonso.
should I take the microphone? So I have a question for Juan Enrique. Buenos días, Juan Enrique. I think that you mentioned something which is relevant, which is what's the market we should pay attention to, because the higher the market, the smaller the concentration. So if we pay attention to what's going on in Portugal, which is a highly concentrated market, it is because they have just 10 million inhabitants, so you need to be big enough to get some money, otherwise, which is the opposite case than the UK. And that may apply to geographical markets, but the same may apply to product markets. So if we pay attention to the news market in Mexico, the figure will be completely different if we pay attention to news in TV, online news plus newspapers plus. So if we split the news market in different smaller markets, the figure will be completely different. So from a public policy perspective, the key issue is what's a relevant market. So I don't know if you have any comment about that.
Well, thank you for this question. I think Alice can.
Take this one.
Low battery, that's why. I got
Thank you. Hi. Well, thank you for this comment. Maybe Alice can correct me, but apparently there is no strong association between the size of market and concentration. So, for example, I mean, Ellis can help me this point. But for example, Mexico is smaller. Is a smaller market than the USA, right? And the concentration is higher in Mexico. So just to mention one thing, right? So what matters? So I don't know if we have really good indicators of the market size. For example, it's not the same having concentration in TV news, which directs to a larger audience, than concentration in press news, right? So which conveys, at least in a Latin American context, a really smaller audience, right? So, so I'm not sure if it ask your.
No, the thing is that size is not the only explanation of the level of concentration. Your market, your national market is highly concentrated because of the regulation, because foreign ownership is not allowed, and because high margins of concentration have been allowed, perhaps because of this kind of special relationship between Televisa and the government, at least in the past. But on top of the geographical market, how we should measure the market? Should we pay attention to news in general, or just newspapers, or just, anyway, that was the question.
I think Alfonso is asking, is there a specific area that should be focused on one specific industry? I said you had a question.
A question about the regulation. I'm very glad that you brought that up. You say that there is no correlation between the quality of regulation and the level of concentration. How did you define quality of regulation? Did you define it as unbiased?
I'm just quoting some of the main results. Not sure if Alice has a comment about that.
Okay. Index, I forgot who issues it. Various indices by various international organizations, and one is quality of regulation. So we adopted that. We did not create that index, but we used
But the methodology is in the book. It does go into explain that there is a specific happiness index and democracy index, and it was taken, it might have been from the CIA or something. Actually, I was going to recommend going next. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just wondering, maybe the question is mostly directed to Joe, but there's always this effort to get at the relationship between concentration and content. And in my reading of the evidence and having read in this literature is that it's all over the map. And the best that you get, what you get in Canada and what you get, I think, in the US is that the evidence is mixed and inconclusive. And so I wonder, is it time to stop looking constantly at the content and try to develop broader understandings of the impact of concentration? So, for example, on the shape, the general shape of the technology, the ability of the companies to set the terms of compensation. So, carrier companies or internet intermediaries setting the terms of settlement for content producers, given the subordination of, and a whole bunch of other things that we might imagine, but we keep going down this content thing, and I wonder if it's too narrow of a tunnel.
Actually, I would agree with you, and I think it picks up to what what Ali was earlier on saying, that these, let's say, take it for granted correlations, which many of the data have destroyed, and that may be a similar one. Yes, I think we need additional factors. No, I would not want to live without that criterion too. But for example, I don't know whether that's also addressed in the data to a certain extent, for example, access. Even if I've got a 95% concentration in some area, as long as citizens would have access to the remaining 5% and they are substantial, would I mind? I'm not sure. So I think access and a few more factors, platforms, use of platforms, ease of use, would probably be something which would go beyond such a study, but would have to be considered, most definitely.
I think this discussion shows that HH index is not enough to explain the concentration, and that research and Ellie's contribution and the recent chapters about the conclusions proves that there is now a fertile ground to redefine the concentration. For example, once upon a time when I was at the Columbia School of International Affairs, I did deal with the democracy. First we come up with the democracy, lexical definition, then it is not only one concept. Same thing can be done in the concentration definition. Weak state, strong state. In order to define weak state and strong state, I look into the state, the autonomy of the civic society and public policy making bodies, and then state autonomy and that kind of aggregation brought the definition of the democracy. Same thing can be done. Now, the point is, and I would like to ask Joe about this, now the current concentration based on HH index is not able to explain the democracy and media and state ownership, and as a result, we cannot, all the regulatory bodies and the policymakers cannot come up with sound policy-making process. Do you agree with that? Could you evaluate on it? Thank you.
I think what the study shows itself is how pluralistic the media market and, by the way, of course, also the political systems are. So I think what we're trying now is to find some general conclusions based on a lot of evidence that for so many areas there's not even a common fundament. So if we ask for correlation between democracy and media concentration, I think we had the answer in the data and the contribution already. The definition of democracy would probably be already differ very strongly, and we'd rather not address this issue, otherwise we would have some fights here. So I agree with you. At the same time, we can draw some conclusions, but they're limited because we itself have a pluralistic background.
Last question.
At the end, you mentioned this idea of internal diversity, that the same organization can own very different publications. Do you see that happening? I mean, is it possible? Where do you see it happening?
It's as long happening. If we have, for example, I think it was for me really one of the really thrilling and surprising results was the very strong and important role that absentee institutions, investors play. So, and I think we pointed to this early on, if an investor is purely interested in making turnover and profit, that might be a good platform of saying, as long as I make money, I don't mind, and I try to guarantee this internal pluralism. Now, if for whatever reason the investor has political ambitions or is suddenly feeling, hey, wow, media, it's now a little popularly put, are great and it's a good means of power, or I can influence the markets or political systems by creating some kind of, or some political influence on the media, this collapses. So, yes, internal pluralism is a possibility. It does exist. In Germany, Springer tries that. No, it stops as soon as the economic model is under threat. And maybe the answer there would be not a regulation, but some kind of, which would be, by the way, a good democratic means, transparency.
Yes.
And and I think soft regulation is not laws necessarily, but just making things transparent. And we live in a transparent society where each and every one of us is completely transparent to all other kinds of instances. Anyway, why not creating transparent structures, more transparent structures?
Yeah. Well, I'll give you the last word if you have anything to add, or if not, I'd like to call the panel to conclusion. Thank everybody. And Marius, our next moderator, to join us up here. And we have